The US will add an additional 25% tariff to 50% on steel and aluminum coming into the US from Canada. The American tariffs, the new tariffs on steel and aluminum, are unlawful, unjustified, and illogical. We will not back down. The US relies on Canada for 75% of its imported aluminum, which will increase the cost of buying aluminum on the American market. We have retaliatory tariffs on over $90 billion worth. On the US side, it will increase the cost to consumers to buy products that are made out of aluminum. We must reinforce our strength at home and safeguard Canadian workers and businesses. What if I told you America's biggest industrial defeat in 2025 didn't come from China, but from the country right next door? It started quietly. A simple tariff hike on aluminum imports. 25% to 50% on the tariffs on steel into the United States of America. But in just months, it has spiraled into a full-scale economic realignment across North America, shuttering United States factories and closing many factories. We've lost manufacturing jobs. We buy the aluminum and they have to buy it from somewhere, collapsing energy demand in the Midwest and handing Canada an industrial advantage it hasn't held in decades. While Washington has been locked in partisan gridlock, Ottawa has been executing a master plan, building new ports, locking in defense contracts with NATO and the Indo-Pacific, and signing long-term green energy supply deals with Europe and Asia. Canadian aluminum, now sold at a premium, is powering everything from Tesla's EVs to the fuselages of fighter jets. The United States thought tariffs would protect its industries. Instead, they may have gifted Canada the keys to the future. This isn't just a trade dispute, it's a race for dominance. And the question is, will America even show up to compete? Stay tuned. You don't want to miss what comes next. Just hours before the new tariff policy was set to take effect, Washington pulled a move that shocked even its closest allies. Import duties on steel and aluminum from Canada were abruptly doubled from 25% to 50% under Section 232 of the Trade Expansion Act. The official line from the White House was that this was about protecting American industry. President Trump continues to take bold action to protect America's critical steel and aluminum industries. But anyone who has followed the numbers knows the truth. In 2023, nearly half of all United States aluminum imports came from Canada. Canada produces 80% of all the primary aluminum in North America. Cutting that supply wasn't just a jab. It was a direct punch to America's own industrial heart. The market reacted like a live wire. In a single day, United States aluminum prices jumped to $0.58 per pound, or $1,325 per ton in the Midwest market, a record high. For manufacturing giants like GM, Ford, and Boeing, it meant an instant, unavoidable choice: absorb crippling cost increases or start shutting down production lines. We've never seen raw material prices swing this fast, said Mark Richardson, an Ohio aerospace supplier speaking to CNBC. And what's worse is there's no clear federal plan to deal with it. The shock didn't stay contained to factory floors. Analysts warned that the ripple effect would hit everything from job security to energy consumption. Some people out there are starting to worry. They don't know if they need to go find another job or not. Higher costs meant slower production. Slower production meant less electricity consumed. And less electricity consumed meant declining revenues for utilities already struggling to maintain infrastructure. It was a chain reaction, and Washington had lit the fuse. At the Alcoa plant in Davenport, Iowa, shift supervisor Mike Jensen told local radio KQWC that production had slowed to a crawl. "We used to run 3 shifts nonstop," he said. "Now I'm sending people home early twice a week. You can see the stress on their faces. Mortgages don't wait for aluminum prices to stabilize." Meanwhile, in Ottawa, the mood was calm, almost surgical. The Canadian government wasted no time. 1.5 billion Canadian dollars was injected into upgrading the Alouette smelter, one of North America's largest aluminum facilities. A long-term, low-cost clean electricity contract with Hydro-Quebec was locked in, ensuring stability in production costs for years to come. No fiery speeches, no public gloating, just precise, calculated action. For line engineer Sophie Gagnon, the announcement meant security. "I've been here 14 years and we've never had this kind of investment," she said. "It's not just about new machines. It's about knowing we'll still be here in 5 years." "They're not reacting emotionally," noted Sarah Thompson, a trade policy analyst at Brookings. "They see this as an opening to rewire their supply chain permanently." The strategy was working. Within weeks, Canada had secured long-term aluminum supply deals with the EU and Japan, completely tariff-free. Exports to the UK, Singapore, and Italy surged. Several Asian smelters ripped up United States contracts and switched to Quebec instead, citing lower costs, cleaner energy, and a far more predictable unpredictable political climate. Luc Bush, who runs a 40-person extrusion plant outside Trois-Rivières, said the deals opened doors he never thought possible. Last month, we shipped our first order to Osaka. 10 years ago, that would have been a dream. But Canada wasn't just thinking about the next quarter's profits. Ottawa was already setting up the next phase of its plan, one that would redraw the logistics map of North America and make sure Canadian aluminum never had to depend on United States infrastructure again. And when that plan became public, it would prove just how far ahead Canada was playing this game. What Ottawa unveiled next wasn't just a trade workaround. It was a direct challenge to America's control over North American supply chains, and it caught Washington completely off guard. Ottawa's next move was bold, calculated, and backed by billions. In late Q1 2025, the federal government formally designated clean hydro-powered aluminum as a strategic national asset, putting it in the same policy category as petroleum reserves and rare earth minerals. This classification meant stricter export oversight, targeted subsidies, and guaranteed infrastructure investment, effectively locking in aluminum as a pillar of Canada's green industrial base for the next decade. The centerpiece of this industrial redirection was the port of Saguenay in Quebec. Historically, over 70% of Canadian aluminum exports moved through United States ports or rail corridors, leaving the sector vulnerable to American tariffs, customs delays, and policy swings. Ottawa decided that era was over. 2.3 billion Canadian dollars in expansion was approved, increasing Saguenay's capacity to handle 69 zero-ton vessels and boosting annual throughput by 15 million tons. When completed, the port's dedicated bulk terminals will connect directly to Europe and Asia without a single stop on United States soil. To make this work, a high-capacity 375-kilometer rail link from the Alouette smelter to Saguenay's docks was upgraded with federal and provincial funding. This cut shipment times by 28% and reduced per-ton transport costs by nearly 12 Canadian dollars. This is trade sovereignty built with steel, concrete, and political will, said Pierre Gagnon, CEO of the Saguenay Port Authority, in an interview with La Presse. Our products will leave on our terms, not someone else's. Saguenay Mayor Julie Dufour called the port expansion a generational shift for the region. This isn't just metal leaving the dock, she said. It's jobs, it's new shops opening downtown, it's young people coming back instead of moving to Montreal. The move aligned perfectly with Europe's Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, which took effect in October 2025. Under CBAM, high-carbon aluminum imports are taxed heavily, while low-carbon imports like Quebec's hydro-powered output enter tariff-free. According to the European Aluminium Association, this could save Canadian exporters between 180 and 200 euros per ton in avoided carbon tariffs, a competitive advantage United States producers, still reliant on fossil fuel-powered smelting, cannot match. Ottawa didn't stop there. A 1.1 billion Canadian dollars was allocated to connect Saguenay's shipping routes with Ontario's EV manufacturing corridor and Manitoba's lithium battery hub. The plan was to create a closed-loop supply chain. Aluminum frames from Quebec, batteries from Manitoba, final assembly in Ontario, all powered by clean domestic energy. In 2024 alone, Canada's EV exports grew 22% year over year, and Bloomberg NEF projects that figure could double by 2027 if current infrastructure expansion stays on track. The geopolitical implications were hard to miss. By re-engineering its logistics and production network, Canada had ensured its most valuable industrial exports could bypass United States territory entirely. They've essentially de-risked their trade from Washington's unpredictability, said trade economist Angela Carter from the University of Waterloo. That gives them leverage not just in metals but in every downstream industry tied to those metals. And Canada's next target wasn't cars or shipping lanes, but a sector so deeply embedded in United States national security that losing it could compromise the Pentagon's readiness. For Washington, this wasn't just an economic challenge. It was the opening move in a much larger contest, because the next sector Ottawa had in its sights wasn't just about profit margins. It was the backbone of American national security. And once Canada made its play there, the pressure on the Pentagon would become impossible to ignore. Aluminum is not just an automotive or construction material. In the defense sector, it's a backbone resource. High-grade aerospace aluminum is essential for missile casings, aircraft fuselages, armored vehicle panels, and satellite frames. The United States Department of Defense's own 2024 procurement report states that over 42% of its high-purity aluminum imports came from Canada, with certain missile and satellite programs depending on Canadian suppliers for nearly 60% of their needs. When United States smelters began shutting down in early 2025 due to the tariff fallout, the Pentagon's supply chain planners went on high alert. You can't build an F-35 or a hypersonic glide body without precision-grade aluminum, warned Frank Kendall, former United States Undersecretary of Defense for Acquisition, in an interview with Defense One. If your ally is also your single point of failure, you've created a strategic vulnerability. Ottawa, sensing this dependency, moved quickly to convert it into leverage. In its 2025 federal budget, Canada boosted defense spending by 6.2%, with 700 million Canadian dollars annually earmarked specifically for aerospace materials production and integration into NATO and Indo-Pacific defense networks. This was not a headline-grabbing procurement spree. It was about strengthening upstream supply capabilities, expanding smelting capacity, upgrading metallurgical quality controls, and securing long-term supply contracts with major defense primes like Airbus, Lockheed Martin, and BAE Systems. The effect was immediate. Rio Tinto's Canadian division, already the world's largest producer of low-carbon aluminum, announced 3 new multi-year defense contracts in Q2 2025, prioritizing Canadian origin metal for both civilian and military aircraft programs. Industry insiders told Aviation Week that Canada's green aluminum was fetching a 15% to 18% price premium in defense procurement because it met both environmental standards and metallurgical tolerances for advanced aerospace manufacturing. Meanwhile, United States defense manufacturers were feeling the squeeze. The Congressional Budget Office warned in July 2025 that aluminum price volatility could add $1.3 billion in unexpected costs to Pentagon programs over the next 2 fiscal years. Production delays were already visible. The F-35 line in Fort Worth, Texas, reported a 3-month lag in parts delivery, partly due to supply bottlenecks in precision-grade aluminum. Canada's strategy wasn't only to serve United States needs, it was to diversify away from them. Ottawa signed new defense industry cooperation agreements with Japan, Australia, and several EU states, ensuring that if Washington's political climate turned hostile, Canadian defense exports would still have premium buyers. They've de-risked their defense sector the same way they've de-risked aluminum exports, noted defense economist James Ferguson from Memorial University. That's not an accident, it's a doctrine. For the United States, this was a wake-up call. The aluminum tariff that was supposed to protect domestic industry had instead deepened military supply dependence on a foreign partner, one now building alternative alliances, and Canada wasn't stopping here. The next phase of Ottawa's plan would extend beyond metals and defense into a green tech race where the United States was already losing ground and where catching up might prove impossible. While Washington was busy firefighting tariff fallout, Ottawa was building something bigger, a fully integrated green tech ecosystem designed to capture the next generation of global manufacturing. And it was already paying off. Canada's electric vehicle sector grew 22% in exports year over year in 2024, according to Statistics Canada, with projections from Bloomberg NEF showing the market could double by 2027 if infrastructure plans stay on track. The backbone of this surge was a closed-loop supply chain few countries can match. Lightweight aluminum frames from Quebec, lithium-ion batteries from Manitoba and Ontario, and assembly plants in Ontario's EV corridor, all powered by abundant hydroelectric electricity. At the Stellantis LG battery plant in Windsor, assembly tech Marcus Rivera, 27, said the demand felt endless. I got hired right out of trade school. My dad worked in an auto plant that closed in 2009. Now he says I'm building the future. The lithium component was key. Canada's lithium sector produced 22 tons of lithium carbonate equivalent in 2024, a 14% increase from the previous year. And with projects like Nemaska Lithium in Quebec and Snow Lake in Manitoba ramping up, output is expected to top 35 tons annually by 2026. This isn't just about raw materials. It's about owning every step from mine to showroom, said Jose Moreno, senior analyst at Clean Energy Canada. Investment was pouring in. Stellantis committed 5 billion Canadian dollars to a new battery plant in Windsor, Ontario, in partnership with LG Energy Solution. Tesla quietly signed a long-term supply agreement for Canadian origin aluminum and nickel in late 2024, citing both environmental standards and supply stability as decisive factors. By Q2 2025, 2025, Canada had overtaken Germany, historically Europe's EV powerhouse, in the number of newly announced EV projects. Strategic trade policy was working in lockstep with industrial development. Ottawa's green industrial agreements with the EU and UK guaranteed tariff-free access for Canadian EVs and components, provided they met strict emissions thresholds. United States manufacturers, still reliant on higher emission materials, were finding themselves priced out of the same markets. Every percentage point of carbon reduction is now a competitive advantage, noted Michael Harvey, VP of the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, and Canada has designed its system to bank those points in bulk. Meanwhile, Washington's EV sector was hampered by fragmented supply chains and a lack of coherent policy. Inflation Reduction Act subsidies were helping domestically, but foreign buyers were wary of United States political volatility and potential export restrictions. According to a report from the International Energy Agency, United States EV export growth in 2024 was less than half of Canada's pace. What Ottawa was building went beyond cars and batteries. It was a blueprint for how to anchor national security, trade resilience, and climate policy into a single industrial strategy, and then use that strategy to dominate a sector before rivals could react. And Canada's next step would prove that this wasn't a temporary boom. By turning its green tech strength into a diplomatic bargaining chip, Ottawa was about to reshape how allies and competitors alike negotiated trade, defense, and climate agreements. By mid-2025, it was evident that Ottawa's industrial surge was not just about producing aluminum, lithium, or EV batteries. It was about converting these resources into diplomatic leverage. Every shipment of low-carbon aluminum, every ton of lithium carbonate equivalent, and every finished battery rolling out of Canadian plants became a bargaining chip in high-level negotiations. In the first 6 months of the year alone, Canada signed 3 major trade agreements: a $4.6 billion green technology partnership with the European Union aimed at joint investments over the next 5 years, a 15-year clean energy supply accord with Japan guaranteeing tariff-free Canadian aluminum for its automotive and aerospace sectors, and an expanded CPTPP framework giving preferential access to Canadian origin EVs and battery components. Together, these deals locked in over 12 billion Canadian dollars in confirmed export contracts through 2030, according to the Canadian Ministry of International Trade. We've moved from being a commodity exporter to being a strategic partner, Trade Minister Mary Ng declared in a keynote address to the Canadian Chamber of Commerce, emphasizing how this shift altered Canada's position in every negotiation, from trade to defense to climate policy. The appeal to partners was clear. German automakers under pressure to meet the European Union's 2035 zero-emission mandate could source compliant materials from a politically stable supplier whose aluminum prices fluctuated only 3.8% year over year compared to 11.5% for United States-produced equivalents, according to a 2025 European Aluminium Association report. In Asia, Japan and South Korea saw Canada as a pathway to reduce reliance on Chinese raw materials without sacrificing quality or environmental compliance. With Tokyo's Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry estimating that the aluminum deal alone would save Japan's aerospace sector $450 million over its term. This growing web of strategic trade pacts did not go unnoticed in Washington. At congressional hearings in July 2025, United States aerospace and automotive executives warned that Canadian agreements were locking in markets the United States could no longer compete for, with Senator Maria Cantwell bluntly stating, "We are ceding entire sectors to a neighbor who is out-negotiating us at every table." For Ottawa, such criticism was confirmation that its strategy was working. By embedding industrial strengths into long-term international agreements, Canada was not only insulating itself from future tariff wars, but also making any attempt to isolate it economically a direct blow to its partners. Yet trade was only one dimension of this approach. In parallel, Ottawa was applying the same strategy to defense diplomacy, using its reputation as a reliable supplier to secure influence in NATO planning rooms and Indo-Pacific security dialogues, setting the stage for consequences in Washington that would be far more than economic. And in the defense arena, Canada was about to secure a role so pivotal that even America's closest generals would have to admit they couldn't win without it. By 2025, Canada's economic leverage had begun translating directly into strategic influence within the world's most powerful security alliances. Ottawa increased its defense budget by 6.2% year over year, earmarking 700 million Canadian dollars annually for aerospace materials production and integration into NATO and Indo-Pacific defense supply chains. This funding was not directed toward flashy weapons purchases, but into upstream capabilities, expanding smelting capacity for high-purity aluminum, modernizing metallurgical quality control, and securing multi-year supply contracts with defense giants like Airbus, Lockheed Martin, and BAE Systems. According to the United States Department of Defense's 2024 procurement data, 42% of America's high-purity aluminum imports came from Canada, with certain missile and satellite programs dependent on Canadian suppliers for nearly 60% of their aluminum needs. This created a quiet but potent form of leverage in sectors where the United States could not easily substitute suppliers without incurring massive costs or delays. Canada's role became indispensable. Rio Tinto's Canadian operations announced 3 new long-term defense contracts in Q2 2025, prioritizing Canadian-origin aluminum for both civilian and military aircraft programs, with aerospace buyers paying a 15% to 18% premium for green aluminum that met both NATO environmental compliance and stringent metallurgical tolerances. Meanwhile, United States manufacturers faced mounting costs. The Congressional Budget Office warned that aluminum price volatility could add $1.3 billion in unplanned expenses to Pentagon programs over the next 2 fiscal years, with the F-35 production line in Fort Worth already experiencing a 3-month delay in parts deliveries, partly due to shortages of aerospace-grade aluminum. Ottawa, however, was not content to remain a subcontractor in United States defense projects. It expanded bilateral defense cooperation agreements with Japan, Australia, and several EU nations, ensuring that Canadian materials would be embedded in Allied defense production, regardless of United States policy shifts. They have essentially de-risked their defense exports, the same way they have de-risked their industrial supply chains, observed defense economist James Ferguson of Memorial University. This combination of economic and security integration placed Canada in a rare position, a mid-sized power with both the industrial reliability and diplomatic credibility to influence alliance policy from the inside. And as Washington struggled with its own political divisions, Ottawa was preparing to merge this defense leverage with its booming green tech sector, creating a unified platform of economic and strategic dominance that would be nearly impossible to challenge without years of catch-up. By the close of 2025, Ottawa had begun weaving together its 2 strongest cards, a dominant position in the green technology supply chain and an irreplaceable role in allied defense manufacturing into a single unified strategy. The logic was simple but powerful. Nations that depended on Canadian materials for cutting-edge EVs were often the same ones sourcing aerospace-grade aluminum and critical components for military platforms. By aligning export policies across these sectors, Canada could maximize bargaining power while locking in long-term strategic partnerships. Federal trade data showed that more than 60% of countries importing Canadian defense-grade aluminum also purchased Canadian EV batteries or lithium carbonate equivalent, creating natural overlap in negotiation leverage. This was no accident. Ottawa's Ministry of Innovation, Science and Industry launched a 1.8 billion Canadian dual-use supply initiative in 2025, designed to coordinate investments in technologies that could serve both civilian and military markets, from lightweight composite materials for EV chassis and fighter jet airframes to advanced battery chemistries adaptable for both electric mobility and naval propulsion systems. The move was welcomed by partners in Europe and Asia. Germany's Federal Ministry for Economic Affairs and Climate Action publicly noted that Canadian EV batteries used in Volkswagen's next-generation models shared 70% of their supply chain with components certified for NATO aerospace use, simplifying logistics and reducing costs. In Japan, Mitsubishi Heavy Industries highlighted that dual-sourcing both EV and defense aluminum from Canada cut procurement lead times by 25% and reduced currency-related price volatility by over 15% annually. For the United States, however, this integration only deepened dependence. A Pentagon logistics audit leaked in November 2025 revealed that nearly half of its contracted suppliers for aerospace aluminum were also tied to Canadian-based green tech firms, meaning any disruption, trade dispute, political rift, or export restriction could hit both defense readiness and clean tech competitiveness at once. It is a textbook example of supply chain interlock, warned Colonel retired Laura Hughes, a former Pentagon materiel strategist speaking to Defense News. Once you allow that level of overlap, you have effectively given the supplier dual veto power. Ottawa, for its part, insisted this was about efficiency, not coercion. Yet with every new dual-use contract signed, Canada's role as a central node in both the green energy revolution and the high-tech defense industry became more entrenched. And as the country positioned itself at this rare intersection of climate policy, trade influence, and military necessity, it was clear that its next steps could redefine not just North American economics, but the global balance of industrial power, leaving Washington to decide whether to adapt or to fall irreversibly behind. The question was no longer if Canada could hold this lead, but whether the United States was already too far behind to catch up. Canada's ascent in the aluminum war is no longer just an economic storyline. It is the blueprint for how a mid-sized nation can turn industrial stability, green tech leadership, and defense integration into a single engine of global influence. In less than 2 years, Ottawa has moved from being a reliable supplier to becoming a strategic hub that Europe, Asia, and even the United States cannot afford to ignore. Its ports and railways are built for speed. Its trade agreements are designed for resilience, and its supply chains are engineered to serve both EV showrooms and military hangars without missing a beat. While Washington remains mired in partisan gridlock, Canada is locking in markets, shaping alliance policies, and embedding itself into the core infrastructure of the 21st century economy. The question now is not whether Canada can sustain this momentum. It is whether the United States is willing or even able to reclaim the ground it has lost. Because if it does not, the industrial center of gravity in North America may shift permanently north of the 49th parallel. So, what do you think? Is Canada's rise the result of smart strategy or America's strategic blindness? Let us know in the comments.